talking about venue, location, and off-venue activity and where that is in the data features model. So the agenda for today then. So we're going to look a little bit around the student turn time accommodation. Then we'll look a bit about kind of the venue and where that is, our study location, the two entities in the model. Then I'll hand over to Charlie to look at off-venue activity and the changes with that. And then there'll be time for questions at the end. We will pause throughout the session, so if you've got some questions as you go, as Matt has said, kind of type them in, or if you want to be recorded, then raise your hand. We'll try and kind of stop throughout the first three so that you've got questions, chance to ask questions as we go. So, starting with turn time accommodation. So this is very similar to current requirements on this. We need to know the turn time postcode for students who are actually at the provider, and then the accommodation type. So these are the type categories. They are all very similar values to now. There are a couple missing, but that's because of the way the structure is now there. You just don't return it if it's not relevant. But the rest of the codes and labels are the same definitions as what we have. So that's the simple one. Now on to venue. So we have the venue entity. There are 5 fields on this. So we have the unique identifier for that to the entity. We've got a physical location, which is a postcode. We've got the name of the venue, the UKPRN of the venue if you're a provider in England. And we've also got a known identifier for providers on there as well. So the guidance in terms of these codes. So if we've got different guidance depending on where you are. So providers in England, separate venues need to be returned when there are 25 or more students studying it, and it's at least 1 kilometre away from a different location. A similar kind of concept to what we have in provider profile, Unisats, but we've amended it slightly to be this definition. So 25 or more students, and they are at least a kilometre apart. Oh, yeah, and note on there, franchise partners also have to be returned within here because, as we'll see later on, you have to kind of identify where students are. We also need to know the franchise partners' locations too. So guidance for the rest of the UK then, so Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. It's very similar, but it is kind of returned if there is separate venues need to be returned, sorry, if there's a significant number of students. So for example, 25 or more, so it's a little bit looser and there isn't that 1 kilometre distance that there is for providers in England. Again, franchise partners also need to be returned. So in both those cases, this guidance has changed for current student and student alternative. I think it's this year or it's next year it's coming up for. So this isn't data features specific, but we have brought it in to be equivalent for data features. So now looking at the study location, which is off. Here we go. So we have the study location sits within the student course session. So what's returned every 12 months, with every 12 months of study broken down. Study location sits off that. And then because you're linking it back to a venue, the venue entity then links into the study location. Okay, so that's where the entity sits. So looking specifically at what fields are within the study location entity. So we've got an identifier for the entity, as with a lot of other ones. And then we've got a flag to say that they are studying by distance learning. We've got a new field now that indicates the student is primarily outside of the UK for their study. And we've got a proportion on there and the venue identifier, which links it back to the venue entity. So there are some boxes explaining all that. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about each of those now. So starting with the slightly newer field on there, so primarily outside of the UK. So this is basically the equivalent to locked study S, location of study code S, that we have in the current student and student alternative, trying to do the equivalent thing in data features. So it's after capturing where the student is going to be kind of mainly outside of the UK for their entire engagement. But currently, when that student is being returned, they are outside of the UK. When they're doing something within the UK, the activity should be recorded as with any other student because they're at a UK university doing something here. So the key difference is you won't record the detail of what they're doing overseas in the off-venue activity because they're kind of the equivalent to the AOR handoff, I suppose, and so we don't need as much detail on those students when they are doing their collaborative provision outside of the UK. So looking at the study proportion field then, so this is a percentage. It's going to relate to the whole of the student course session. I will go into some examples later, so don't worry too much, that kind of helps hang it together. In terms of adding things up, so we might not have all 100% returned within the study location because there are cases when we don't need that detail. So you might say that there's here's the study location and the venue for a certain percent, but then return the overseas activity in the off-venue activity. You won't return some of that percentage in the study location as well. It's kind of one or the other. But it does mean that the totals are not going to add up to more than 100% because clearly you can't get more than 100%. As I say, the examples will probably help show that in more detail. So just in summary, so what the study location entity is kind of trying to do, it's collecting data where the student is studying somewhere else or a partner's venue and how much of that study is that. When they're doing distance learning, it flags that. And it captures when they are outside of the UK, and that's going to be the main picture of their engagement. So just a reminder then, but with some of these fields on, here is how it kind of fits together. So you've got the student course session on the right-hand side. This is their main year of study, and you'll have multiple ones of these. You've got the study location entity sitting off that. So you will kind of say for this student course session, this is where they're studying. And if it's relevant, you return the off-venue activity and describe to us what that's going to be. And the link to the venue entity is through study location. So what about delivering organisations then? So we have one tiny question mark over this, but I can tell you where I think we are at the moment. So if you are in England, you're using the UKPRN field on the venue entity to describe who is delivering that. And then on the right-hand side, if you're in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, the module delivery role is showing is telling you what that delivering organisation is against a module. So this is kind of saying what's happening overall, and the module delivery role is saying this is actually what's happened as the student has progressed. Now the course role is where we've got a tiny question mark still. So at the moment, this is for England, Northern Ireland and Wales, and we're still waiting to hear back from Scotland on their requirements on this. But this course role is kind of telling you up front what you think the picture is going to be. The module delivery role tells you exactly what's happened and when it's happened, and course role kind of gives you that picture up front when the student starts the course. This is what we think the picture is going to look like. So I'm going to pause there before I start the examples. Are there any immediate questions on some of those fields or descriptions or anything?
Thanks, Rachel. I was just about to interrupt you at that point as well.
Oh, perfect.
There's a question here about coverage. Is there a change to the coverage in terms of students who are outside the UK for their whole course?
Changing coverage students who are outside of the UK? No.
I don't believe there is.
I think it's a simple answer there. Yeah. We've got the same kind of split between student and AOR as we have now. There is an AOR review, well, had started off and now it's been paused, which might potentially change that. We don't know yet. But in terms of general coverage, that is the same. The differences is in the detail of off-venue activity and what you might return within that. But Charlie will touch on that in the second half.
Brilliant. No other questions at the moment.
Okie dokie. Then I will step through the examples because hopefully that will help.
Oh, sorry.
Gel it together.
Sorry, I am going to interrupt you. I had a question that I managed to field, but I think it's changed slightly. So the question was going back to the rationale between choosing the definition of separate venues. So I had originally gone back and said, well, this is a student alternative change, not a data future change. But the question's been asked, what was the actual rationale behind choosing the definition of separate venues? Do we know?
It was around the statutory customer requirement and the level of detail. So I think it was around needing to have a little bit more detail about exactly where students were located. So in provider profile, at the moment, you can choose kind of between campuses and stuff and the way that you refer to it. But because there's a lot more use made of that kind of location and particularly pinpointing exactly where students are, we needed to kind of break that down into a bit more of a consistent definition and potentially breaking it up. If you're using the same kind of postcode or something, then actually that can mean quite different with experiences because actually they are quite far apart. Particularly, somewhere like London, that's actually there's a lot of different buildings and campuses within smaller areas. So it was around that. It was around getting more information in terms of the uses behind the uses for statutory customers behind this data. Okay, we will step through the examples then. So the first one I've got then. This is a case where a student has one module, and that module is franchised out to Poppleton College. My favourite example. So in this, you've got the course role, because this is a provider in England. So this is an example for a provider in England. You've got the course role to say the delivery and organisation is most of this, so that's 95% in terms of the proportion. And then you've got the 5%, which is doing at Poppleton College. Then at the student core session level, again, you would put the proportions of that study location. So 80% of that is going to be at the campus of submitting provider. And that might be broken down into more, but we've simplified it for these examples. And then Poppleton College is going to be for the 20%, because it's 20% of that student core session. So looking at that in other ways, so if you were in Northern Ireland, Scotland or Wales, you don't have that course role. Yeah. And so then the study location, again, it might be 80% at the venue, the campus of the submitting provider, sorry, and then the study location for the 20% at Poppleton College. And you do have the link through modules, so module instance and a custom module. And so the module delivery role, entity off module, will show that this is a franchise partner, and the franchise partner is Poppleton College, and so it was 100% for that specific module. So that's the first example. Then we've got a distance learning student. So their student core session returned, and basically that is just in the study location entity. You flag that distance is 01, which is the distance learning based in the UK. So you don't need a venue ID because the student is distance learning. You just submit to say that they are distance learning, and so that's all we need to know. So example 3 then. The student is going to study for half their time at the submitting provider, and the remainder is going to be a placement of some kind. So in this student course session, the study location would say the proportion is 50% for the campus of that provider. And then you would return an off-venue activity to show the placement. So you'll notice that the study proportion will not add up to 100%, as I said, because some of that activity is in off-venue. And there are dates and durations around off venue, so we can tell that how much study they've actually done in that. And you will probably also return the placement flag in the student course session as well to say that they're doing a placement. Example 4. So the student is going to be studying mostly outside of the UK for their entire engagement. In this student course session, they're going to be in the UK for half of it and outside of the UK for the other half. So what you are returning then in that student course session, the study proportion is going to be 50% for the campus of the submitting provider and 50% for the non-UK flag to say that they are primarily overseas. So as I mentioned, one of the principles, we don't need off-venue activity to spell out exactly where they are and what they're doing for the parts outside of the UK, because they are one of these type of students where most of their study is not in the UK. And again, on the student course session, you'd probably be returning the study abroad flag as O2, so part of the year, because that is what they're doing. So example 5. So a student is expected to study for the entire of their student course session in the provider. So you'd be returning the student course session and 100% campus of the submitting provider. However, halfway through the student course session, so probably in the second or maybe third reference period that you're returning the student course session, the student agrees with the provider they're going to carry on doing this by distance learning, for whatever reason that is. So the student course session is returned in the next reference period, but you will change the study location to say that they are 50% at the campus of the provider, and now you're 50% also doing the distance learning flag 01, which is again based in the UK. So at the point that that decision has been made, that is when you would then update those things. You didn't know it right in the very first reference period you returned it, and that's fine. You just update it when you find this out, when it changes. So the next example then, so example 6, the student will be studying in the UK for their entire engagement, but in their third year, they decide to take a full year overseas. So in their third student course session, the off-venue activity is recording the student's activity. Don't need to return a study location because the whole of the student course session is actually the off-venue activity. So we don't need that study location to be returned because there isn't anything that they're doing in the UK. And you'd probably have the study abroad flag in the student course session flagged as 01, which is full year study abroad. Example 7. So this is a PGR student who's spending most of their time in the UK. In their final student course session, they've decided to go write up. They are doing their writing up their dissertation, and it's going to be outside of the UK. So this is their final student course session, whatever number that ends up being, and you change their session status to say that they are now writing up. So that is 04 in the status changed to value. That will indicate that they are writing up. And in the student course session, you probably say that they were studying abroad because they are overseas. So don't need a study location, and we don't need an off-venue activity because when they're writing up, we don't need to know their specific location. So that is all of the examples I have in terms of the actual venue and location side of things. Hopefully stepping through those 7 examples just helps to kind of highlight where the fields are and pin them together.